There is a moment right before everything falls apart when you can still feel it coming. A pause in his voice that lasts half a second too long. A warmth that used to be automatic, now arriving late, like it has to travel farther to reach you. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself you're imagining it. But somewhere underneath the noise of daily life, your body already knows what your mind is refusing to accept. A contract is about to break, not a contract written on paper. A contract written in the space between two souls, the kind that forms the instant two people recognize something in each other that words can't quite hold. You didn't sign it with a pen. You signed it with the way your chest tightened the first time he looked at you like you were the only person in the room. He didn't sign it with a promise. He signed it with the way he needed that look more than he ever admitted, more than he understood himself. This is the story of what happens when that contract breaks. Not the breakup itself. That part is easy to describe. A door closes, a phone goes quiet, a name stops appearing on your screen. That's the surface. What we're going to talk about is what happens underneath in the part of you that keeps living the relationship long after it has ended. Because here is the truth almost no one tells you. When an empath and a narcissist come together, it is never random. One arrives with a heart built to give, to feel, to absorb the world's pain, and somehow keep loving anyway. The other arrives with a hunger they can't name, a hollow place where warmth should live, and an instinct to fill that hollow with someone else's light. For a while, this looks like magic. It looks like fate. Two people who seem to complete each other so precisely that everyone around them says, "I've never seen you like this before." But magic and hunger are not the same thing, even when they wear the same face in the beginning. The empath believes she has found her mirror, someone who finally sees her, all of her, without flinching. The narcissist believes he has found his source, someone whose light is bright enough to make his own emptiness disappear, at least for a while. Both of them are right, and both of them are about to learn, in very different ways, exactly how expensive that rightness is going to be. This isn't a story about a bad person and a good person. It's a story about two different relationships to love. One person loves by expanding, giving more, feeling more, believing that if she just loves hard enough, she can reach the part of him that's still capable of loving back. The other loves by consuming, taking in affection the way a starving man takes in food, without tasting it, without gratitude, simply because the hunger is louder than anything else he knows how to feel. For a while, this works. It works because the empath doesn't yet know she's pouring water into a container with no bottom. It works because the narcissist doesn't yet know that no light from the outside can fix what's broken on the inside. Neither of them understands the mechanism they're caught in. They only know it feels enormous, inevitable, and in the beginning, almost holy. Then, slowly, something shifts. The eyes that used to look at her like she was the center of the universe start scanning the room for someone new to look at. The voice that used to soften just for her starts going flat, distracted, somewhere else entirely, even when he's sitting right in front of her. She feels it before she can explain it. A coldness moving in at the edges, a distance opening up in a space that used to feel like home. This is the moment the contract starts to break, not with an argument, not with a scene, with silence, with a kind of quiet that feels louder than any fight ever could, because it means the connection that used to be automatic now has to be forced, and forcing it is exhausting in a way that neither of them wants to admit out loud. What happens next determines everything, not just how the relationship ends, but who each of them becomes on the other side of it. Because when a soul contract like this breaks, it doesn't just end a relationship, it starts a reckoning. One for each of them, running in parallel, invisible to the other, and completely different in what it demands. For the empath, the reckoning is about learning to survive a loss that doesn't look like a loss to anyone else. For the narcissist, the reckoning is about discovering that the thing he thought he could always replace, the light, the mirror, the reflection of himself he found in her, was never as replaceable as he believed. This is where our story really begins. Not at the first date, not at the first fight, but at the exact moment the contract breaks and two people who once completed each other are sent without warning into two completely different kinds of darkness. One of them will spend the coming weeks grieving something the world refuses to recognize as a real loss, because on paper, nothing happened. No one died. A relationship simply ended the way relationships do, and yet she will feel it in her body like an amputation, phantom pain in a place where connection used to live. The other will spend those same weeks performing a version of moving on that looks convincing from the outside and feels increasingly hollow from the inside, chasing something to fill a space he doesn't yet understand he can't fill this way. Two people, one ending, two different stories about to unfold, and only one of them walks toward the light. The first week after it ends, nobody warns you about the strangest part. It isn't the crying. Crying, at least, makes sense. Your body knows what to do with grief, even if your mind is still catching up. The strangest part is the silence where the noise used to be. The phone that doesn't buzz at the exact hour it used to. The habit of reaching for your phone anyway, out of muscle memory before you remember there's no one left to reach for. You keep waiting for the relief people promised you would come. Instead, what comes is a kind of static, a low hum of unfinished business running underneath everything you do. You'll be in the middle of a meeting or making dinner or driving somewhere unremarkable, and out of nowhere a memory will surface with a violence that doesn't match the size of the moment. A song, a smell, a stranger who laughs the way he used to laugh. And suddenly you're back there in a version of the relationship that only exists now in your nervous system, replaying itself without your permission. This is not weakness. This is not you being unable to move on. This is what happens when a connection that ran deep enough to feel automatic gets severed before it's finished. Your mind understands the relationship is over. Your body is still finishing a conversation the other person walked away from mid-sentence. And here is where the two of you begin to diverge in a way that will define everything that comes next. You are doing the hard thing. You are staying present with pain that has no obvious cause on the outside. No visible wound, no cast or bandage to explain why you're moving slower than usual. You are letting yourself feel the full weight of something the rest of the world will tell you to just get over, as if love were a cold you could sweat out in 72 hours. You are doing this because some part of you, even in the depths of it, understands that skipping this step doesn't make it disappear. It only pushes it underground, where it waits, unresolved, for a worse moment to resurface. He, meanwhile, is telling a story, to himself, to his friends, maybe already to someone new, about how fine he is, how this was overdue, how you were too much or too sensitive or too complicated, and he is finally free of it. He says this with enough conviction that people believe him. He almost believes it himself. But here is the part he doesn't know yet, the part no one can tell him because he wouldn't hear it. The story he's telling isn't healing. It's avoidance wearing the mask of confidence. And avoidance always sends the bill later. For now, though, it looks like he's winning. He looks lighter. He looks like someone who walked away clean while you're still standing in the wreckage. This is the part that stings the most, the part that makes you question whether you're doing something wrong by still hurting this much. You watch him post a photo laughing, arm around someone new within weeks, and every rational part of your brain says that doesn't mean anything, and every wounded part of your heart says, but what if it does? Here's what it actually means, and it's worth sitting with, because this is the piece nobody explains clearly enough. A narcissist doesn't move on, he replaces. Those are not the same thing. Moving on requires metabolizing what happened, understanding your part in it, sitting with the discomfort of your own choices, integrating the loss into who you become next. Replacing requires none of that. It only requires finding the next source of attention fast enough that you never have to sit still long enough to feel the emptiness underneath. This is why the transition looks so fast, so effortless, so infuriatingly smooth from the outside. It isn't strength, it's avoidance with excellent production value. He isn't skipping the pain because he's stronger than you. He's skipping it because he doesn't yet have the tools to survive it. So his nervous system routes around it, the way water finds a path around a rock instead of through it. Meanwhile, you are doing something he cannot yet do and won't for a long time, maybe ever. You are staying. staying with the discomfort, staying with the questions that don't have satisfying answers, staying with the parts of yourself that loved someone who couldn't love you back the way you needed, and asking, honestly, what that says about your own patterns, your own history, your own unhealed places that made this connection feel so magnetic in the first place. This is not comfortable work. It is, however, the only work that actually leads somewhere. Because here's the truth about pain that gets processed instead of avoided. It doesn't just fade, it transforms. It becomes insight. It becomes boundaries you didn't have before. It becomes the ability to recognize next time the exact feeling in your chest that told you something was off long before your mind caught up to it. He is buying himself a few weeks, maybe a few months of feeling untouchable. You are buying yourself something that lasts. You are not on the same timeline anymore, even though it might look that way right now. You are on a slower road that actually arrives somewhere. He is on a fast road that circles back to the same place he started again and again until something finally forces him to stop running. That something is coming, but it isn't here yet. Right now, all you can see is the unfairness of it. He gets to look fine while you're the one falling apart. Hold on to this, though, because it matters. Looking fine and being fine were never the same thing, and that distance is about to become impossible for him to hide. Something changes around the third month. Not for him, for you. You wake up one morning and the static is quieter, not gone, quieter. You notice it the way you notice a headache has finally lifted. Not because you were tracking its disappearance, but because you suddenly realize you've gone an hour, then a morning, then a whole day without thinking about him. It feels almost suspicious, like relief you haven't earned yet. You wait for the grief to come crashing back in and punish you for forgetting. It doesn't. It just sits there, smaller than it was, taking up less space than it used to. This is the part nobody tells you about healing. It doesn't arrive as a single triumphant moment. It arrives in the quiet erosion of things that used to hurt constantly. The song that used to wreck you plays in the grocery store and you just keep pushing the cart. The old texts, the ones you used to reread at 1 a.m. looking for a clue you missed, start to look like they were written by someone else, some earlier version of you who didn't yet know what you know now. And what you know now is this: you were never the problem. You were simply the only person in the relationship who was actually present for it. While this is happening to you, something entirely different is happening to him. And here the story takes the turn almost no one expects, because it isn't dramatic. There's no scandal, no public unraveling, no confrontation where the truth finally comes out in front of everyone. It's quieter than that, and in some ways worse. The new relationship, the one that was supposed to prove he never needed you in the first place, starts to feel strangely unsatisfying. He can't quite name why. She laughs at his jokes. She tells him he's brilliant, charming, everything he's always wanted to hear. And yet something is missing, some ingredient he can't identify, some quality the last connection had that this one doesn't. What's missing is you. Not your name or your face, but the particular quality of attention you gave him. The kind that came from someone who actually saw him, who paid attention not just to his performance, but to what was underneath it. That kind of attention is rare and isn't easily replaced by someone new simply being impressed by him. Admiration and true seeing are not the same currency, and only one was ever capable of filling the hole he's been running from his entire life. So he does what he's always done. He looks for someone else. And when that doesn't work either, someone else again. Each connection burns bright and fast and then goes strangely flat, faster than the last one did, because each time he brings less of himself to it, having spent whatever capacity he had for real connection on you without knowing that's what he was doing. Meanwhile, the people around him start to notice things they didn't notice before. A friend who used to laugh off his moods pulls away, tired of managing someone else's ego. A colleague who once admired his confidence starts to see it as thinner, more brittle, more performative than they realized. The things that used to charm people begin, slowly, to wear on them instead, the way a joke that's funny once becomes exhausting on the 40th repetition. This is not punishment raining down from some cosmic ledger. This is simply what happens over time to a person who has never learned to generate warmth from the inside and has instead spent his whole life borrowing it from whoever was standing closest. Eventually, the people standing closest get tired of being drained, and they step back one by one without ever coordinating it. They just quietly stop showing up the way they used to. And here's what happens in the space that opens up when the borrowed light runs out. He starts to remember things he worked hard to forget, small moments. The exact way you used to look at him before things went wrong. Not the anger, not the tears at the end, but the early days when you looked at him like he was already enough before he ever had to perform for it. That memory surfaces at inconvenient times, late at night, during arguments with someone new that feel eerily familiar. In the silence, after another shallow connection fizzles out for reasons he can't quite explain to himself, he will not call this grief. He doesn't have the language for it, and even if he did, admitting it would mean admitting something about himself he has spent a lifetime avoiding. So instead, it will show up as restlessness, as irritability, as a strange dissatisfaction with a life that, on paper, looks exactly like the one he said he wanted. You, on the other hand, are building something real during this same stretch of time. Not a performance of healing, actual healing. You're learning to trust your own perception again, after months of being told your feelings were an overreaction. You're learning to sit in a room by yourself and feel calm instead of anxious, a skill you didn't realize you'd lost until you started getting it back. You're noticing with something like surprise that you don't check his social media anymore. Not because you're forcing yourself not to, but because you've stopped needing to know. This is the quiet, unglamorous middle of the story. The part that doesn't make a dramatic highlight reel, but is where the actual work happens. No one is watching this chapter. There's no audience for the version of you slowly, patiently becoming whole again in private. But this chapter determines everything that comes after, because what you build here alone in the quiet is the foundation. Nothing he does, not an apology, not a return, not one more attempt to pull you back in will ever be able to shake loose again. Then one day he reaches out. It might be a text that looks casual, thinking about you, or saw something that reminded me of you. Engineered to seem spontaneous while doing exactly what it's designed to do. Test whether the door is still open, or it might be heavier, an apology dressed in just enough vulnerability to feel sincere. Either way, the timing is never random. It arrives precisely when you've stopped waiting for it. This is the moment that determines everything. Not the breakup, not the weeks of static and grief with no name. This moment right here, when the person who once made you question your own perception shows up again, asking without quite asking to be let back in. Here's what almost no one tells you about this moment. It isn't really about you. It's about him discovering in the month since you left that nothing has filled the space you used to occupy. Not the new relationship, not the attention from strangers, not the version of himself he performed for an audience that eventually stopped clapping. He isn't returning because he changed. He's returning because he ran out of substitutes. If this had happened 3 months ago, you would have answered before finishing the message. Your body would have lit up with the old, familiar hope. Maybe this time, maybe he finally understands. Maybe the version of him you always believed was underneath the performance is about to show up for real. That hope isn't foolish, it's just old. It belonged to a version of you who hadn't yet done the work of the last few months. But you're not that version anymore. You've spent this time learning to sit with silence instead of fleeing it. You've spent it learning to trust the quiet, steady voice inside you instead of the loud, urgent one that used to mistake chaos for chemistry. And that voice, the quiet one, the one you almost lost the ability to hear during the relationship, is very clear about what this message actually is. It is not remorse. It is a request for supply. This doesn't mean none of what he's feeling is real in some limited, self-centered sense. It means what he's feeling isn't the same thing you once mistook it for. He doesn't miss the specific person you are, your history, your humor, the way you think through problems, the things that make you who you are apart from him. He misses the effect you had on him, the way you made him feel important, admired, whole. That absence is real, but it was never really about you. It was always about what you did for him. Understanding this distinction is the difference between healing and relapsing into the same story with a different ending in mind. So you sit with the message. You don't answer right away, not because you're playing a game, but because you've learned that your first instinct isn't always the wisest one. That urgency itself is often the trap, the thing designed to make you skip the step where you actually think. And when you do think about it clearly without the fog of old hope clouding the picture, you realize something impossible to see 3 months ago. This reaching out isn't a sign that he's changed. It's a sign the consequences finally caught up to him. The friends who pulled back, the relationships that kept feeling hollow no matter how many new ones he tried. The quiet, private moments when the noise stopped and the emptiness he spent his whole life running from finally caught him standing still. He's not reaching out because he wants to grow. He is reaching out because growth is hard and you were easy to return to, easy to fall back into, easier than doing the actual uncomfortable work of becoming someone capable of real intimacy instead of borrowed light. And here's the part that matters most, the part this whole story has been building toward. You don't have to save him from that work. It was never your job, even though the relationship convinced you otherwise. Your job now is simpler and harder and more important than rescuing anyone. Your job is to keep becoming who you were becoming before he interrupted, and to keep becoming who you're becoming now that you've finished grieving the interruption. So you don't respond with anger. You don't need to. Anger would mean he still has enough of your attention to provoke a reaction, and you've moved past needing to prove you're over it. You also don't respond with warmth, because warmth would mean opening a door you spent months learning to close for good reason. You simply don't respond at all. And in that silence, the same silence he once ran from, the same silence you once feared, something finally settles into place. Not triumph exactly. Something quieter and sturdier than triumph. Peace. He will tell himself a story about this silence, the way he tells himself stories about everything. He'll decide you're still hurting or bitter or playing hard to get, because the actual truth that you simply moved on completely without needing him to witness it is too plain and too final for his ego to hold. But you know the truth, and the truth is enough. You didn't win this. There was never a game to win. You simply completed something he couldn't. You turned an ending into a beginning. You took a connection that once felt like it defined you and let it become the exact place where you learned who you are without it. That is the entire difference between the two of you in the end. He is still looking for someone to complete him. You have quietly, patiently become whole on your own, and that is a door no message, no apology, and no amount of reaching back will ever be able to open again.